Well, good evening and welcome to Chosen People Ministries Bible study. I'm excited because we are going to begin a new book. The book is called Zephaniah. The book's called Zephaniah, and Zephaniah could mean either the Lord hides or he whom the Lord hides. So it could be, in a sense, it could be that the Lord is hiding, or it could be that he's hiding something, or he could be protecting something. And there is really one key thing that he just can't stop talking about. Have you, my brother, for example, is a graphic designer. If you ask him about Macintosh computers, once he gets going, oh my goodness, you can't stop him. That's all he can talk about. Hours can pass as he talks about it. When you first discover a new passion, whether it's tennis, backgammon, or cookery, whether it's baking or backgammon or badminton for that matter, you often find yourself talking about this new passion. And the new passion that Zephaniah has is a difficult subject to address, because we live in a world that says God won't do anything either good or bad. God won't do anything, either good or bad. Amazingly, in Zephaniah 1, verse 12, that's exactly the attitude of the people at the time of this letter. They looked out and they thought, do you know what? Doesn't look like God's going to do anything good or bad. I'm just going to get on with my life. Zephaniah doesn't want us to make that mistake. This book, it's not designed to as a sort of an evangelistic tool to go out to the nations and say, you're going to be judged, you're going to be judged. In a sense, when we looked at Jonah going to Nineveh, he was being sent there. That isn't what's happening here. Even when we looked at, if we looked back to Nahum, really what we were seeing was something was going to happen to Nineveh, and this judgment that fell on Nineveh was giving us a picture of a greater judgment that was to come. But the message of Zephaniah is of a universal provocation of the creator of the universe that will lead to a universal judgment of his universe, and then to a universally transformed universe. And perhaps that's why for many years Zephaniah has been considered to be a great compendium, one commentator said, in the 16th century, a great compendium that if you want to understand the essence of the message of the prophets, read Zephaniah. And why is he saying that? Well, because you're introduced to a prophet at the very beginning of Zephaniah, then you're introduced to a judgment that takes place universally and individually, and then as this judgment then extends in chapter 2 through the Philistines and Cush and Assyria, we see that he's working his way through the known world. And then the book ends with a song about a great banquet. So in some ways, the book of Zephaniah is a bit like my bathroom. It was, it didn't have a shower. It didn't have the taps. One of the taps is always leaking, and the kids were always kind of didn't have the knack, and so quite often water was all over the floor. It's a bit of a mess. And so what happened was we took out everything, stripped it back to the bare edges of that building, and now we have a shower and a bath and a huge window that opens, and it's transformed. But to get to that point, that there had to be a judgment. Things had to be ripped out and destroyed. There was a huge pile of rubbish on the front of our house. You could see, in some ways, you could see that something had gone. That was very public. And now the private thing we've got is a nice, clean, white bathroom. Well, I say that until the teenagers get in there, and then, of course, we're back to square one. And that's the wonderful thing about this promise of Zephaniah is that the transformation that will take place is permanent and perfect. This permanent and perfect transformation is a message that's delivered to the redeemed and not to the rebels. It's to us and not the world. It's more a message to me than it is to them. And it's really to the I rather than the you. It's the sense of this book, I think, is this saying that people have: when you point the finger, 3 fingers point back to you. So I'm not going to do much more on sort of an overview because I think there's quite enough in these opening sections that I've found interesting, and I hope will encourage you. The purpose of this book is to refocus our attention on a compelling eschatological vision. To refocus our attention on a compelling eschatological vision. I want to take you to James chapter 5, verse 7, where it talks about us being patient until the Lord's coming. I want to take you to 2 Peter 3:10, where it talks about the day of the Lord coming like a thief. I want to take you to 1 Peter 5:4, or even Hebrews 1 verse 2, when it talks about us being in these last days. Or to Jude 21, the doxology of eschatology, or maybe Galatians 6:16 that wants to point us to the new creation, or 1 Thessalonians 4:16, or 2 Thessalonians 1:7, or 1 Timothy 6:14, or 2 Timothy 4:8, or maybe more familiar, Revelation 22:20. I want to take you to all those places, but I haven't got time for that. What I want to point out to you is that all those letters are doing exactly the same thing that Zephaniah is doing. They're saying, live this way, live in obedience to the Lord, because in the end, this great day of judgment will come, and it will be a wonderful day of vindication for us. Till then, we suffer much. But on that day, we will suffer no more. Till that day, we'll suffer much, but on that day, we'll suffer no more. That's the hope that Zephaniah wants to show us. So first of all, the word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, during the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah. This is, in the past, we've had debates about when the book was written or when the prophet was working. But this time we can see very clearly that it's somewhere between 640 and 609 BC. So it's a book that is at least 2,500 years old, and yet it still speaks to us. And there's two things I want to say. The first thing is, have you ever wondered what the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah means? The word of the Lord came to Zephaniah. It means that God spoke to Zephaniah and brought something that he knew to reality. He made something real. Sometimes people say, God has laid on my heart X. God's laid on my heart a desire to reach out to the ultra-Orthodox. It's made something real for me with them that wasn't real before. The word of the Lord came to Zephaniah. When it came, it gave him a passion to tell the redeemed about their future hope. And then, have you noticed this description of this man? Again, in the past, we haven't known who the person is exactly, but we know something about this man. And did you notice that there are two kings picked out there, Hezekiah and Josiah? They are the roses amongst thorns of Jewish kings. They were great reformers, but not perfect reformers. They were, as a famous comedian used to say, close but no cigar. They were close but no cigar. Hezekiah and Josiah, they were great reformers, but they weren't the perfect reformers. If we go back to my illustration of the bathroom, they weren't bad builders, but they weren't perfect. And what we're being promised in this book is a perfect rebuild. That's why he says, I'll sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away both men and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. The wicked will have only heaps of rubble when I cut off man from the face of the earth. One translation I read said, I'll put everything to the end. I'll bring everything to an end. I'll bring everything to an end on the face of the earth. I'll bring everything to an end, both humans and animals. I'll bring everything to an end. The birds of the air and the fish in the sea. Do you think it's coincidence that he uses this image of sweeping everything away from the face of the earth? Or is it possible that that is supposed to evoke in us some memories about previous occasions of God's judgment? You know, when Noah when the flood swept away mankind, and yet God rescued a remnant. So he's going to sweep everything away from the face of the earth. This is the universal nature of the judgment, because all creation is broken by sin. And in God's perfect rebuild, he's going to make everything perfect, because his creation is a reflection of him. Romans teaches us that the invisible God is made visible by the creation. And look, when it talks about men and animals, birds of the air and fish of the sea, they are again, I often use this word merism. They are the opposite ends of things. Fish in the sea, birds in the sky. You know that song, our God is a great big God. He's like higher than this, lower than a submarine, higher than a bird or something. I can't remember exactly, but that's the idea of it. We all know that song. I think anyone that's worked in Sunday schools knows that song. He's going to sweep everything away, and the wicked will have only heaps of rubble. We're being, sometimes we, and we see it in scripture, that believers look on and see the wicked prospering and wonder when God will finally act, or if he'll act, or if we've misunderstood, or they doubt. Here, what we're being told is that on the great day of judgment, the wicked will have only heaps of rubble. It's not saying they'll have, that's what they'll have. It's just, it's the idea that what they had will be utterly destroyed. So the first thing Zephaniah wants us to see is that there is a coming judgment. And then comes an interesting section. I'll stretch out my hand against Judah. You could almost imagine the first readers, I'll stretch out my hand against the FIEC and the First Baptist Church, and your church name appears. Insert that in the place of Judah. I'll stretch out my hand against Judah and against all who live in Jerusalem. I'll cut off from this place every remnant of Baal, the names of the pagans and the idolatrous priests, those who bow down on the housetops to worship the starry hosts, those who bow down and swear by the Lord, and who also swear by Moloch, those who turn back from following the Lord and neither seek the Lord nor inquire of him. Be silent before the sovereign Lord, Adonai Yahweh. Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. In this tiny little section, we see that judgment seems to begin with Judah, which is interesting because Judah are not the firstborn. Well, they're not the firstborn by birthright. They're the firstborn by divine appointment. So the first people mentioned specifically for judgment are the people who were chosen by God to be the people of God. You look in Genesis 29 and 49, you'll see the two ends of that. The very people that God chose to be a light to the nations have failed in their task. If you like, the magnets have ended up as monsters. The magnets, they're supposed to be magnets drawing people to the light of the truth of the gospel, but in fact they're monsters. And now Zephaniah has been shown 6 ways in which these people are failing. The first one, well, let's just say, so stretch hand, Judah and Jerusalem. In a way, it really, that first little bit is just saying Judah and Jerusalem just are all God's people in God's place. Then he says what he's going to do. He says he's going to cut off from this place every remnant of Baal. Baal was the fertility god. He was the god that was worshipped in order to ensure fertility of the land, of animals, and of people. He really was. He was the prosperity god. He was. I was going to say the prosperity gospel god, and maybe that's what I want to say. That in modern terms, he might well be the prosperity gospel. Worship this God and it will bring you prosperity. Whereas the message of the gospel is, instead of prosperity, it's eternity, and instead of material wealth, it's spiritual wealth. So these Baals will be cut off from every place, every remnant. So where Josiah and Hezekiah failed to destroy all false religion, God won't make that mistake won't stand. And then we've got the names of pagan and idolatrous priests. So there were false teachers in the church. There were false teachers in this context as well. You know, not only have we got the New Testament warning us of this great dreadful day to come, but we've also got many warnings about false teachers and false priests and false religions. And guess what? Like I said in the e-blast, our need for God never changes and people never change. It's our failures are the same today as they were when this letter was first read 600 years or so before Jesus was born. So there are false pagan priests, idolatrous priests, and people are following them. And the best way to deal with this situation is to remove them, just like they removed my damaged bath and broken basin from my bathroom. Next, there are people on rooftops worshipping the stars. They call them astral worshippers. Israel are taught to look up at the stars and to see them as the work of their creator God's fingers, as a picture of the great promise that God made to Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. They're not to be worshipped because they're part of creation. And we'll see as we move on to the next little section that actually we're not to worship things that are part of creation. We're going to be consecrated, to set aside to worship the Creator. So, as if Baalists, false priests, and astral worshippers weren't enough, I guess Mystic Meg, I don't know if some of you might remember Mystic Meg. She died last week or the week before. You know, it seems harmless enough, doesn't it? Reading star signs and talking about, when everyone used to ask, what star sign are you? It was a natural thing to ask people in general conversation. And then it turns out when you go to a church, people don't talk about that kind of stuff. I was amazed. But now I'm not, because although it might seem harmless, it's what it points us to is anything but. Okay, the next group, people who bow down and swear by the Lord, that's Yod Hey Vav Hey, that's the covenant name of God. So people worshipping the covenant, worshipping in the covenant name of God, who are also they're also bowing down to Moloch. Now, Moloch is the Canaanite god that was a constant snare to the Israelites, despite the fact that they've been warned. And do you know what the face of this Moloch god was? You probably all know that he's the god of child sacrifice. But guess what his face was? His face was a calf. It was a golden calf. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence that God's people made a golden calf and worshipped it I don't think it's a coincidence. The Canaanite god. So the first clear demonstration of syncretism, you could say it was the story of the golden calf, where God's people took the image of a golden calf and mixed it with the Yod He Vav He and tried to make a religion that would work, because they didn't know where Moses was and they thought they'd better get on with things. Syncretism nowadays is a sort of it might be a Christian, someone go to the Baptist church, but also involved in Reiki healing or tarot cards or some such other thing. And I don't say, I mean, it could be any church. I shouldn't say in a church, but it's just this idea of God plus something else. Paul rages against this in when he talks about people adding to the gospel, and that by adding to the gospel, it becomes no gospel at all. That's the same message being given to us here. So when they say that, Jewish people often tell me that Paul invented Christianity, well, I say to them, what are you talking about? It's all in the Old Testament. It's just, look at this. Look at this. Let's get Zephaniah out. Have a look at that. You'll see. Here comes, after this one, comes those who turn back from following the Lord. They've even got backsliders. They've even got backsliders in the list. I've had times where I have backslidden. I've become like a pig in my own muck. It starts, doesn't it, backsliding with feeling like you don't want to do something changes, and a little bit of yeast works through the whole dough, and you find yourself distant from God and blaming him for it. And like the prodigal son in Luke, it takes a while before you realize that you were better off before, and you make your way back to the Father. And instead of being seen as some sort of second-class citizen, he welcomes you with open arms and has a great party for you. That's the kind of God we've got. That's what God is constantly offering to his backslidden people. It's the same then, it's the same now. And then lastly, these people who neither seek the Lord nor inquire of him. This is a slightly different group. This you could call a practical atheist. Somebody who, maybe you could say a synagogue goer, a church goer, a mosque goer who doesn't believe in God, but goes because they're culturally Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, or Hindu, or anything. It's just part of who they are, but they're living as practical atheists because they don't believe any of it. They don't pray. They don't. There's no. It's not a living faith, and a dead faith, a faith without deeds, as James would call it, is dead. And it's really, I don't know, it's really, I imagine it's quite hurtful to God for his own people to marginalize him in their lives. I imagine that's hurtful. If at the end of Zephaniah we see great joy at the, then when God's people follow the Baalists or the false priests or the astral worshippers or the syncretists or the backsliders or the practical atheists, it grieves him. It actually grieves him. And there is an irony, isn't it? It really struck me. I don't know. It struck me for the first time that if God's people are worshipping the god of Moloch, who's the god of human sacrifice, He's the very opposite of the God they should be worshipping. They're worshipping the God of human sacrifice when they should be worshipping the God who became human and sacrificed himself. It's the very opposite of what they should be. And then in the second half of verse 7, the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He's consecrated those he has invited. This, I have spent far too much time exploring this half a verse. Hopefully you've all had this experience of just thinking you'll look up one word, just want to be sure what the word consecrated means. Have you ever had that experience? And then the 2 hours have gone and you've basically spent your time chasing the word consecrated through the Bible. And then you think, why was I chasing this again? Because I'm now thinking about all the events that took place to do with consecration. It is easy when you read the Lord has prepared a sacrifice to think of what sacrifice? The sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And maybe it could be that, but it isn't. That it certainly isn't going to be in the minds of the original readers. It's the preparation of a sacrifice, because he's consecrated those he's invited. Invited to what? You have to ask yourself. Invited to the great banquet. It's a reminder that the Lord has prepared a sacrifice and he is the one who has consecrated us and made it possible for us to enter into this wedding supper of the Lamb. By rights, we should be swept away from the face of the earth, just like the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. We should be cut off from the face of the earth. But because the Lord loves us, he's prepared a sacrifice that is used to consecrate us. The word consecrate, it appears in Exodus 19 at Sinai. You know, the people had to be consecrated before they could even hear God speak. The priests and the altar need to be consecrated in Exodus 28. Leviticus, there's the idea that blood needs to be sprinkled 7 times to fully consecrate the altar. Essentially what's happening, and then when they cross over the Jordan, the people are consecrated after disobeying at Achan's sin. In 2 Chronicles 7, at the temple is consecrated. And actually, there are so many examples of this, which is why it's so interesting how the Bible can use one word to say a lot of things. Do you remember the guy that had to take his shoes off because he was standing on consecrated ground? That Moses, when he went to the burning bush, he had to take off his sandals. He'd obviously been to Clark's before he went out, and he'd obviously been to Clark's, and he was told to take his sandals off. They're nice sandals, Moses, but you're on consecrated ground. Take them off. He is the one who makes us holy. And on the day of the Lord's sacrifice, he says, I'll punish the princes and the king's son and all those clad in foreign clothes. I don't think we've seen that happen yet, have we? In reality, we haven't seen it happen. We've seen it happen in part when kings fall. I think most clearly, like Saddam Hussein. Do you remember the visual images of them pulling down that huge statue of this terrifying dictator? His government and his power and everything's pulled away, and what grew back in its place is arguably worse. This isn't that. This is God's demonstration of his princely status. Like we talk about Jesus being the Prince of Peace, Beit Sar Shalom. The princes of this world will be punished. The king's sons, the people that should inherit all the power, they'll be punished. The people that step over the threshold, they're not sure exactly what that means, who fill the temple of their gods with violence and deceit. On that day, declares the Lord, a cry will go out from the fish gate, wailing from the new quarter, a loud crash from the hills. Wail you who live in the market district, all you merchants will be wiped out, all who trade silver will be ruined. So we first have the privileged group of princes, kings, and people clad in foreign clothes. And then we've got the commerce, the marketplace, the merchants, the silversmiths, and the businesses. They too will come under judgment. And there's something in verse 12 that always strikes me. At that time, I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent. When you watch, I don't know if when you watch a film with the old films, you often see the man like wee Willie Winky riding through the town with his little light going through, or like they're searching through this ancient town for the person who stole the golden fleece or whatever it is. There's a picture here of the creator of the universe searching through a city with a lamp. Darkness, there's no hiding in the darkness because his light brings all truth to reality. These are people who imagine in verse 12 that the Lord will do nothing, either good or bad. But verse 13 says, wealth will be plundered, their houses demolished. They'll build houses but not live in them. They'll plant vineyards but not drink the wine. Again, you could spend a few hours probably searching through Bible Gateway and this phrase about planting vineyards, the very opposite of God's promise to his people, that they would drink the wine from vineyards they hadn't planted. It's in the new creation, we'll have these vineyards that we haven't planted that will provide us with everything that we need, just as it did in Eden. And yet there will be people who will be expelled from the houses that they had built. You know, a house is a picture of a hope for the future. People who were hoping to live in these houses but didn't, hoping to drink the wine but never drinking it. That's not the future that God is promising us. He's promising Jesus said, didn't he? He's going ahead. In my Father's house, there are many mansions. I'm going ahead of you to prepare a place for you. And Zephaniah wants to say in verse 14, this great day of the Lord is near. It's near and coming quickly. Listen, the cry on the day of the Lord will be bitter. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress, a day of anguish, a day of trouble, of ruin, darkness, gloom, clouds, trumpets, battle cries, crumbling cities, and a great distress. It says in verse 17 that the blood of those judged will be poured out like dust. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. I think in my mind, the best visual illustration of what's going on here, it's like that God's holiness is like the water held back by a dam. It's huge, like huge, 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 huge. Think of a huge reservoir. Think of the largest river you can imagine, dammed up. And people are living down at the bottom. La, 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 nothing's going to happen to us. It's fine. But then one day it cracks, and God's holiness whooshes through the town and sweeps it away. It's not as if people didn't know there was a huge dam there and the dangers. We're being warned that this is how the world will come to an end, the world as we know it, before the new creation begins. And chapter 1 finishes with this phrase, in the fire of his jealousy, the whole world will be consumed, for he'll make a sudden end to all those who live on the earth. Last thing I want to say, in the fire of his jealousy, the Lord's, I think I've said before, I think I told you guys the story of me and the dance floor in Brighton, where I stormed onto the dance floor because my wife was dancing with another man. I don't think Fiona, you might have been in hospital for that, but I think others were there for the story. I was acting like a jealous husband. And I was, as I reflected on it 20 years later, I was questioning whether my motives were entirely good, let's say. We're not to make the mistake of thinking of the Lord's jealousy like our jealousy, like coveting, like all that kind of stuff. He's not jealous for us in that sense. He's the perfect husband who is jealous for his perfect bride. And all that he has done in chapter 1 of Zephaniah is told us that this great judgment's coming, and that it is motivated by the fire of his jealousy, which is his love for us, expressed in the covenant of marriage, and in so many of the promises of the New Testament, where the church is pictured as a bride. That image comes directly from the Tanakh. It's one story of a Genesis wedding in the beginning and a massive great wedding at the end. And it's the fire of his jealousy, his pure, perfect, holy, unimaginable jealousy, that drives his wrath to come and to perfectly judge everything in creation, and then to restore everything in creation so that it is finally without blemish or wrinkle, to use, I think, the vocabulary of Ephesians. If so, so what? If so, so what? It is helpful to see, or to be reminded, that time had a beginning and it will have an end, that even time is part of God's creation, and that this image of it, and the Bible begins with a description of days and ends with a description of a day, and then from that, endless days. And we need to think about, are we living like the practical atheists of Zephaniah chapter 1? Have we done all we can to retrieve backsliders? You know, like Paul talks about plucking people out of the fire like smoldering sticks. Do we know people that are mixing their faith with other faiths, other religions, other beliefs, or following false priests, or worshipping creation? I'm sure we do. I'm sure there's stuff that we can correct in our own lives and in the lives of people we know. And I think it's a great warning for us of how we're supposed to live.